Hi, everyone. Hey, everybody. Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Oh, my goodness. Hey, everybody. How's it going? Thank you for joining. I figured I would take some time to address all of you, answer any and all questions that you may have after this just incredibly violent and traumatizing week for so many people. Hey, everybody. Oh, it's so great to see folks hopping on. Hey, everyone. I just wanted to hop on and I want to talk to each and every one of you about what happened this past week, answer your questions about what happened then, answer your questions about what's happening right now, answer your questions about what you may have, any questions that you may have about the future, the coming days, weeks, months, frankly, years ahead of us. I'll start by just lightly describing a little bit of what I went through on Wednesday and what all of us went through. So Wednesday, as we know, was the president, frankly, assisted by members of Congress, incited an attack on the United States Capitol. This is known as an act of insurrection, an act of sedition. And frankly, he is a traitor to our country, a traitor to the United States. And I don't really think that there's any other way you can put it. There is no other way to really there's no other way to put it. You attack our democracy, you undermine the elections of one of the most revered democracies in the world, one of the oldest democracies in the world. And you've attacked our elections. You vote to undermine them. You amplify a lie to undermine faith in our systems and our democracy, and knowingly amplify a lie. And if you are Senator Ted Cruz or if you're Senator Josh Hawley, and frankly, if you're many members of Congress, you cast that vote not out of genuine belief, but you cast it out of political ambition. And that is what they did. They incited an attack on the Capitol, and many members of Congress were almost murdered. Many congressional staffers were almost killed. Many children of members of Congress were there. Children. Some of them were adult children. You have folks like Congressman Jamie Raskin, who tragically, Congressman Raskin, Jamie, is a very close, very, very deep and close friend of mine. And he tragically, and his family tragically lost their son a couple, just days before this attack. And his daughters were with him in the Capitol days after that trauma. And they nearly lost their lives too. As for myself, I had a pretty traumatizing event happen to me. And I do not know if I can even disclose the full details of that event due to security concerns. But I can tell you that I had a very close encounter where I thought I was going to die. And you have all of those thoughts where, at the end of your life, and all of these thoughts come rushing to you. And that's what happened to a lot of us on Wednesday. And I thought I did not know if I was going to make it to the end of that day alive. and not just in a general sense, but also in a very, very specific sense. And, you know, I think it's an opportunity for a lot of us to talk about trauma as well. One thing that I can say is that in the aftermath of this, there have been a lot of counselors and there have been physicians in the house talking about the importance of, you know, some of the rapid response that happens, and that what we can do in our minds and our brains after you are exposed to a traumatic event. And I think what's really important is that, you know, because whenever any person has an encounter where they think they're going to die and they go through that process, that is a traumatizing event. And you don't have to, things don't have to get that far for something to be traumatizing. I once really excellently heard trauma. And I'm so sorry to whoever is the author of this thought, because I don't remember who said this, but I once heard trauma described as too much, too fast, too soon. And so when psychologically a development happens that is way too much, way too jarring for an individual, if it happens, or if something happens that happens way too fast, or if it happens way too soon, that could be a traumatizing event for a person. And I think what's really important is that, you know, there are degrees of it, but for a lot of people, whether you are a service member who served in our armed forces abroad, whether you are a person that maybe experienced domestic violence, any traumatizing event at all could, you know, Wednesday's events could have been very triggering for you too. And you don't have to have been there. You could have just seen it on TV. You could have just heard about it. But if you at all feel unsettled in a deep way, that your intuition is kind of telling you, you know, something's not right, go check in with somebody. You know, there's no problem with that. There's no shame in that. It's healthcare. Mental health care is healthcare, which is why, by the way, why we fight for mental health care to be included in healthcare provisions and bills like Medicare for All. Anyways, all of that is an aside. I want to cut straight to the chase. Wednesday was an extremely traumatizing event. And it is not an exaggeration to say that many, many members of the House were nearly assassinated. It's just not an exaggeration to say that at all. We were very lucky that things happened within certain minutes that allowed members to escape the House floor unharmed. But many of us nearly and narrowly escaped death. And it's also extremely traumatizing. And what was also traumatizing was how unsettling that day was, because there was a sense that something was wrong. And obviously with the violence, but there was a sense that something was wrong from the inside. As we saw, there were members of Capitol Police who were quite heroic. You know, we have many officers, and, you know, there were also Black and brown officers that were confronting white supremacists and putting themselves not just to protect members, but they put themselves in harm's way on the front line, facing the racist violence of white supremacists ordered by Donald Trump to attack the Capitol. And so there were those acts of heroism. But next to that, there was also acts of betrayal. And to run in the Capitol, in our nation's capital, and not know if an officer is there to help you or to harm you is also quite traumatizing. I know I myself, there was a member, or rather there's a secure extraction point, and a secure room that you may have heard a lot of people, members give interviews from. They say, I'm in a secure location, I'm in a secure location. Republican members of Congress didn't wear masks. They refused to wear masks in that enclosed secure location. And now we are on, just in the last 24 to 48 hours, our third Democratic member of Congress who just tested positive for COVID, because they were sheltering in that place. I myself did not even feel safe going to that extraction point, because there were QAnon and white supremacist sympathizers, and frankly, white supremacist members of Congress in that extraction point, who I know and who I had felt would disclose my location and allow me to, who would create opportunities to allow me to be hurt, kidnapped, etc. And so I didn't even feel safe around other members of Congress. And to be kind of fending for yourself in that way is traumatizing. And frankly, I know for a lot of you, I don't even have to describe it, because you've been through it in school lockdowns, and you've been through it in false alarms, or if, God forbid, some of you have been through that I hope and I pray that none of you have ever been in a shooting, but if you have been in a shooting, you know what that feels like. And it is no joke, it's no joke. And that's what happened Wednesday. Now, what happens now? We know that Donald Trump cannot be president. We know that we cannot wait until January 19th. We cannot wait until January 20th. We cannot wait until Inauguration Day. He cannot be president right now. He should not have been president yesterday. He should not have been president the night of the attack. Because Republicans and the people around him are cowards, they will not do it. And in fact, the secretaries, there is something known as so when people say, how do we get him out? How do we get him out? There are actually several avenues. So through the House and congressionally, there's impeachment. Through the president, through the president's cabinet and the vice president, there's the 25th Amendment. And what the 25th Amendment allows is, what the 25th Amendment allows for is essentially a majority of the president's cabinet and larger portion of the president's cabinet and the vice president have to move forward and declare the president essentially unfit, unwell, and that he must be deposed, or rather he must be removed from office. And that's what the 25th Amendment does. The president's cabinet, you have Secretary Elaine Chao, who is the wife of Mitch McConnell, by the way. Does that seem a little conflict of interest, inappropriate? I don't know. But regardless, she was the Secretary of Transportation. She resigned. Betsy DeVos has resigned. Acting Secretary of DHS, Department of Homeland Security, has resigned. And all of them are resigning rather than fulfilling their duties in enacting the 25th Amendment and removing the President of the United States. I have a message for anyone who is resigning after Wednesday. Too late. Too late. You're not going to resign after Wednesday and act like you weren't a part of it. Were you secretary on Wednesday? Yes, you were. You were a part of it. Were you secretary every single step leading up to Wednesday? Yes, then you were a part of it. You don't get to allow for an attack that kills 5 people. And then afterwards you say, I wasn't a part of it. Yes, you were. You were a part of it when you caged kids. You were a part of it when you repealed Title IX. You were a part of it when the president committed the first dozen number of crimes that he committed. You were a part of it when you excused the law breaking. You were a part of it. You were a part of it. You were a part of it. Those 5 people's blood is on your hands. What are you going to do? And they think that resigning is going to clean that blood off their hands. It is always on them. They are forever stained with the deaths of 5 people, especially when they did not invoke the 25th Amendment to remove this president when they had the power to do so. Cowards. Cowards. Couldn't even stand up in the memory of these officers that they pretend to care about. That they pretend to care about. I don't want to hear or see the Republican Party talk about blue lives ever again. This was never about safety for them. It was always a slogan. Because if they actually cared about rule of law, they would speak up when people break the law. They would speak up. They would enforce fairness and equity, but they don't give a damn about the law. They don't give a damn about order. They don't give a damn about safety. They give a damn about white supremacy. They care about preserving the social order and the mythology of whiteness than the grandeur of our democracy. That's what they care about. They lust for power more than they care about democracy. That's what those people did when they voted to overturn the results of our free and fair elections. And you can barely call them that with the amount of voter suppression that they have engaged in across the country. It is generous, to say the least, to call them that. And so with all of the rules rigged in their favor, the Electoral College is built on a compromise with slavers. The Senate is rigged in their favor. Gerrymandered districts are rigged in the Republicans' favor. This presidency and the law breaking and the pardons of people who have betrayed our country, all of it rigged in their favor, and they can't even win with the whole deck stacked with them. They can't even win with the deck stacked in their favor. And so what they are willing to do is set a match and light our entire democracy on fire so that they can uphold the social order of white supremacy. That's what this is about. Straight up. This is about thinking that if an election doesn't reinforce your power, then you believe it is fundamentally illegitimate. And why do you think it's illegitimate? And how do you try to delegitimize our elections? By saying Black people shouldn't vote. By saying Latino people shouldn't be full U.S. citizens. By trying to strip citizenship away from people who already have it. We're not even getting to the denial of citizenship, a full civic personhood that this party engages in. We're talking about them trying to strip the citizenship away from anybody who isn't them. Anybody. And that's what this is about. That's what this is about. And that's what I mean when I say that their lust for power has driven them away from loyalty to democracy. To democracy. So it's not just Trump that has to go. It's not just Trump that has to go. Because let me tell you something. When these rioters broke into our nation's capital, they flew the Confederate flag inside our nation's capital. Let me break down the historical significance of that for you. This happened. They flew the Confederate flag for the first time in American history in the U.S. Capitol. It didn't even make it in during the Civil War. And there were members cheering them on. Don't get it twisted. Don't let them act like they didn't. There were members who were supportive. You had a member of Congress from Colorado saying, my people are outside. They flew the Confederate flag when it didn't even make it in during the Civil War. And they said, those are my people. So let me tell you something. Let me share this with every member of Congress who voted to overturn the results of our free and fair, again, a generous assessment election, to vote to overturn the results of our election. If any member of Congress so much as stutters to say that the Confederacy were traitors to the United States, that the Confederacy is a legion of white supremacists, if you so much as stutter to say that, turn in your pin and get out. Go join them. Why don't you go join them if you are so sympathetic to them? But you have no place in the capital of the United States of America, in the citadel of democracy, if that's the trash that you believe in. Because we will never go back. I'll tell you that right now. We will never go back. The only way forward is a multiracial democracy that fights for the economic rights of all people and the civil rights of all people, period. And they would rather see our country burn than to see them be shoulder to shoulder equal to others. That is the tragedy of white supremacy. The tragedy of white supremacy is that it is doomed to fail. It's doomed to fail. White supremacists will never, ever, ever live in a world where they will see their fantasies come true. Ever. Which is why they rely on violence. That's why they cling to violence so much, because there is no other way for them. There's no other way. Every other way is democratic and cooperative, where we all must share our genius with one another, where our society is not built on supremacy or on a politics of domination of one another. And they can't live in that world. They can't live in a world without supremacy, without domination. They can't live in a world where they can just coexist. No, they have to reign supreme. And since a white supremacist world, and since supremacy in general is a myth, it will never be true for anybody. Since supremacy is a myth, they have to resort to violence. They have to. Because there is no other way for them. But you know what? What is the result of that? Nothing. It's nihilism. It's just destruction. And then what claim will you have? That you rule over a destroyed society? That the ashes belong to you? Never. Never. And so I want to be clear to Senator Ted Cruz. You do not belong in the United States Senate. I want to be clear to Senator Josh Hawley. You do not belong in the United States Senate. You do not belong in any democratically elected seat when you do not believe that that election was even legitimate, according to your self-serving claims. So get out. If they had any shred of integrity about their claims, their lies really, but their claims about this election, they would take off their pin and turn it in. But this isn't about the truth to them. This is about if they want to be president in 2024. Let me give you a sneak peek. You will never be president. You will never command the respect of this country. Ever. Ever. And you should resign. So should every member of Congress that voted to overturn the results of our election. Because they would rather cling to power than respect our democracy. That is putting the short term above the long term. And so many of our problems, so many of our global problems, our societal problems are all the way down, comes down to that. It comes down to that. It comes down to putting the short-term gain and prioritizing small short-term gains and allowing them and just grabbing at them at the expense of long-term structural losses, right? That's everything. Where we prioritize this quarter's profits over long-term economic well-being for all people, right? That's why they're paying people less than a living wage. Sure, it may boost up your Q1 profits, but what happens down the road when no one can afford your goods? Same thing with climate change, right? Where we're burning all the fossil fuels in the world and we're clinging on to this system of fossil fuels because of the short-term profits that it bears, and we're allowing that to happen even though we know that it's causing long-term destruction of our planet. Media, same thing. The short-term conflict-driven news cycles that get elevated every day that don't mean, frankly, shit. Sorry, I try not to curse on this thing, but I'm upset, as you can tell. And they bring up and froth up all of this short-term nonsense in our headlines, and they lose the long-term story every time, right? And then with our democracy, where you have members of Congress that are more interested in being, I don't know, a meme and driving a short-term news cycle and making policy decisions. And listen, I'm telling you this, I know as someone who wields social media, I understand that people may wield this critique about me, but I will tell you that when it comes to using social media, there's a very fine line between a member using it and social media using the member. And they are allowing themselves to be used, to be consumed, and to be radicalized, and to radicalize back. And they're making policy decisions based on that, instead of wielding it to speak to their constituents and make their case. Now, I know a lot of people may not understand that distinction, and so they're going to run off in all of these accusations, but I'm telling you how it is. And so what they're doing is that they're playing to cameras, and they don't care about actually being a damn legislator to serve the people of the United States of America. They don't care. If they cared, they would have certified our democratic elections. If they cared, they wouldn't have amplified the lie If they cared, they would have protected their colleagues instead of tweeting out their locations for the mob to find them. If they cared, they would have done and acted with integrity, but they didn't. They don't care. They care about themselves. They care about their elections. They care about their next gig. They care about their money, their power, their fame. And this is how democracy can burn. It is fragile. We must cherish it. And they didn't. And they don't. So they need to leave. Donald Trump needs to leave. Ted Cruz needs to leave. Josh Hawley needs to get out. They need to get out. McCarthy, leader of the House Republicans, voted to overturn our elections. The same election that he was elected in, he voted to overturn. Steve Scalise voted to overturn our elections. Leaders of House Republicans, party leadership. This is like if Nancy Pelosi voted to overturn the results of our elections. You know, you have, each party has their leaders. Nancy Pelosi is leader in the House. McCarthy is the leader of Republicans in the House. Rather, Pelosi's leader of Democrats, and she's speaker. She's speaker of the entire House. McCarthy is leader of the Republican parties in the House. He voted to overturn the results of our election when his members were begging him for guidance. They were saying, what do we do in this moment? He did not provide any leadership to his own party. He cared about himself. He cared about supremacy. He cared about power and dominance over democracy. He needs to go. Scalise needs to go, along with anybody who sided with these Confederate traitors. A reminder that the Confederacy was not part of the United States, was never part of the United States, will never be a part of the United States. They are traitors to democracy. They are enemies of a multiracial democracy, and they will never have glory in our history, in our present, or in our future. Period. But what we have to do right now is that I need folks to understand that all of us have to strap in. Because the amount of people that have been radicalized in this country is very, very large. And it is deep. And this is a generational wound that we're going to have to fix. Because Ted Cruz can hang it up and leave. Josh Hawley can hang it up and leave. McCarthy can hang it up and leave. But they egged this on every step of the way because they thought it would win them a freaking election. And now we have to clean up the mess of a radicalized, and Mark Zuckerberg too, creating recommendation engines, just funneling millions of people into white supremacist groups and organizations. He recommended it. He built the platform for it. He accelerated this. Many people are responsible for it. Many, many people are responsible. And, we're going to have a lot of work to do because they created this mess. They created this violence for short-term gain, knowing the long-term loss, knowing the long-term cost. And they will do it over and over and over again until they experience personal consequences, because that's what all of this was about. Every step of the way, they gave up long-term cost to all of us, a long-term cost for all of us, for personal gain, personal gain, personal gain. And as long as they have a shred of personal gain to get in making the same decisions, they will continue to make them. That's why they gotta go. And that's why they need to experience consequences. Not because it's punishment, not because it's I'm getting back at you, but because consequences are the only way they will stop contributing to violence. It's the only way they will stop contributing to undermining our democracy. So they need to go. They need to get out. Mi familia en Texas, my family in Texas, get ready. Because if Ted Cruz doesn't resign, and if the Senate doesn't expel him, we got to take him out the old-fashioned way, and that means we need to organize and vote him out in an election. That's what we're just going to have to do. If he's not going to resign, if the Senate won't expel him, we have to support a challenger to him in an election. That's what it is. Josh Hawley, Missouri, he took that seat from a Democrat. Democrat can take it right back. Democrat can take that seat right back if he will not resign. He should be ashamed. But of course they're not ashamed. Of course they're not ashamed. He fist-pumped insurrectionists that killed 5 people, 4 people, and potentially a 5th. We don't know. We don't know the full story. So that's what we got to do. We got to organize. And I think what we saw in Georgia is a really good example with Black women leading the way, with multiracial and multicultural organizations leading the way. They proved that southern states are not red states. They are suppressed states, which means the only way that our country is going to heal is through the actual liberation of southern states, the actual liberation of the poor, the actual liberation of working people from economic, social, and racial oppression. That's the only way. That's the only way. We just got to keep pushing. But tonight, the votes that happened were to urge Vice President Pence to invoke the 25th. And then tomorrow we vote on impeachment. We will be impeaching the President of the United States tomorrow. And while it's a little late for some Republicans to try to scramble together a reputation, you know, maybe if there's anyone in that party left who is willing to not only act out of selfish interests, maybe you should vote to impeach him, not because of the way it'll game out for you politically. Maybe you should vote to impeach him because he's an active threat to every single American, and that you should help us actually save our country for once. Maybe you should just do it because it's the right thing to do, instead of what you can build a freaking email list off of, or whoever's paying you or paying your campaign to do whatever it is that you do. Why don't you just vote because it's the right thing to do? And maybe you can vote tomorrow on a different thing based on you thinking it's the right thing to do. And the day after that, maybe you can vote on something else in the way that you vote on it because you think it's the right thing to do, and not because of the political pressures of the donor class and what they put on you and the way that they make you feel like you can justify it to yourself. maybe we should just start voting on things based on whether we think it's right or not. And stop pretending that this shit's complicated. Because it's not. You're either with the people or you're with that mob. It's pretty clear cut. Anyways, I'm going to answer some questions. Now that I went off on my rant, happy to answer some of your questions. I want to pull up the question tab real quick, see what I can do. Someone said, can you please save this live? I jumped in late. Yes, I can save the live. What does it mean to impeach Trump for a second time? Well, what it means is that the House has found him or will be finding him guilty of another crime, a second crime. This crime, the article of impeachment that will be filed, will be insurrection against the United States. President ordered an attack on this country. If another head of state went into that lawn and did what he did, I think it would be considered pretty widely by many people as a very violent and provocative attack. And there would be a response. And there should be a response to this violent and provocative attack. So the thing is so what happens when impeachment gets voted for? So impeachment managers have been announced, and impeachment managers are several members of the House. I don't have the full list in front of me, but Jamie Raskin is an impeachment manager. Joe Neguse of Colorado will be an impeachment manager. Stacey Plaskett. So my Virgin Island fam, your member of Congress is going to be an impeachment manager. Joaquin Castro will be an impeachment manager. Several others, I apologize, I don't have the whole list in front of me, will be impeachment managers. And essentially what that means is that once the House votes on impeachment, the impeachment managers essentially walk over the articles of impeachment to the Senate. The Senate essentially convenes into kind of like a court in its setup. And the impeachment managers essentially act as prosecutors in the case against the president. And so that would be the next step in the impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump. And if he is convicted, if enough Republicans are vote to convict the president, he may be removed from office. He will be barred from ever pursuing federal office ever again. There's also the potential for him to not be able to pardon himself in crimes associated with the impeachment charges. So, that among, potentially other consequences are what is up for impeachment. And when we talk about removal from office, there are several ways that Donald Trump can vacate his seat. He can resign. As you can imagine, the odds of that are relatively slim because he's a narcissist, but he could resign. That is one option. There is the 25th Amendment where the vice president and the cabinet remove the president, and there is impeachment. Some folks have also looked into the 14th Amendment, which explicitly talks about removal due to insurrection. And so there is some kind of exploring there, but the task ahead of us and the most clear-cut path right now is impeachment or the 25th. Mike Pence has said that he doesn't want to invoke the 25th, and so we are pursuing impeachment. Looking at some of your other questions here. Would we know the verdict tomorrow? So the verdict won't happen immediately tomorrow. Tomorrow, we will know the consequences of the House vote. So we will know if Donald Trump will be impeached tomorrow. So let me back up. There's two parts of actual removal of the president. There's impeachment and then there's conviction. And so we will find out if the House will impeach Donald Trump tomorrow. Spoiler, it's probably going to happen. We have the votes. But we will officially find out tomorrow if the House has a successful vote on impeachment. So we find out the president will be impeached tomorrow. But now on his conviction and whether he is convicted and whether he is removed, that is then up to the Senate. And so it's just like a trial, right? So we find out if he's being impeached, almost like when you have indictments or charges, etc. That's what's happening in the House. The House then walks over those articles, and then the trial begins. The trial happens in the Senate. And then we find out if the Senate convicts. And so that will happen at a later date. We don't have a specific day or date because there's still some things happening in the Senate. So we'll learn more on that process as time goes on. But that is what will happen there. Will the trial continue out after he is out of office if needed? Yes. There is nothing that prevents an impeachment hearing, against Donald Trump, even if the trial kind of bleeds into or after he leaves office. Is there any point in conviction after inauguration? Yes, there is. One of the biggest points is that it prevents Donald Trump from ever holding federal office ever again. And so, as you know, he lost. Donald Trump lost the election. He lost. He didn't even win the popular vote last time. So I don't know why so many members are surprised that he lost this time. But he lost. And so it would potentially mean, technically, that he would be able to run for president again. And so conviction, even after the inauguration, would prevent him from ever being able to run for president again, or ever even being able to threaten to run for president again. So it does have a benefit because he lost. Let's see, just looking at some of the other questions you guys have here. Someone said, do you think violence will continue after the election? It is my prayer that it doesn't. And I hope that it does not. But that being said, we saw this violence before the election. What we saw in Kenosha with the killing of protesters, what we saw in just mass shooting after shooting after shooting. They're often done by radicalized white supremacists. And that is a problem that doesn't go away. You can't vote that problem away. And that really, at the end of the day, is just the ultimate severity of the issue that we have at hand. The people who are dangerous today will continue to be dangerous the day after the election. And it's going to take a lot of work to, heal. I will say that it is possible. We held we did these hearings. I serve as the vice chair on the subcommittee for civil rights. on oversight. And we did a lot of hearings about white supremacy and white supremacist groups last year, how they try to infiltrate law enforcement. You know, there were people who testified that a lot of these white supremacist organizations, he testified about his experience, and he was a person who was a neo-Nazi, and through a transformative experience that he had in his life, he de-radicalized. He was able to extract himself from that, and now he has dedicated his life to trying to de-radicalize others and educate people about what he saw and what he experienced in his time being radicalized in a white supremacist organization. And one of the things that he had said was that in his group, in the group that he was in, you know, they were actively told to not get tattoos and to not get specifically white supremacist affiliated tattoos, because it would make it easier for them to get into law enforcement. Because if you have those tattoos, you can be disqualified quite early. So I say that because it just indicates just a crumb of the work that we have to do, because a lot of people have drank the poison of white supremacy. And that's what Donald Trump represents. Just is. And if at this point you haven't recognized that and you don't see it, maybe you have a lot of work to do too. Maybe we have a lot of work to do. But that's a real big issue that we have. Someone said, I'm seeing here $2,000 checks. Is that also a priority? Yes, it is a priority. We are fighting, the first thing that's on the table, I think, is a real COVID relief package, because people didn't get a real COVID relief package. $600 is a joke. And so what we're fighting for is for retroactive unemployment, for $2,000 checks, for expanded state and local funding, so schools can actually be funded to do the retrofits that they need to be healthy. We can fund mass testing and tracing, all of it. So it's absolutely a priority, and I'm just looking forward to us getting past this nightmare. But we are going to get past it. And this is something we're going to have to live with. Student loans, yes, absolutely. That's going to be a huge priority. Climate change, huge priority. Let's see. Any discussion in Congress about federal truth and reconciliation or media literacy initiatives to help with healing? I can't say, I don't think that the response, this kind of like medium term response has fully crystallized yet. But what I can say is that there's absolutely a commission that's being discussed, but it seems to be more investigatory in style rather than truth and reconciliation. And so I think that's an interesting concept for us to explore. And I do think that several members of Congress in some of my discussions have brought up media literacy, because that is a part of what happened here. And we're going to have to figure out how we rein in our media environment so that you can't just spew disinformation and misinformation. It's one thing to have differing opinions, but it's another thing entirely to just say things that are false. And so that's something that we're looking into. Some folks are asking what I'm doing for my own healing. Thank you for that question. I think I'm still figuring it out. So far, I've just been trying to give myself a lot of rest. And I definitely know that my body and my brain have been at work because I've had like 2 days since the attack where I just slept a lot more than I usually sleep. And that to me is telling me that my body's going through something and my brain is trying to heal. And so I'm just trying to give myself as much rest as possible. I'm sure I'm going to talk to somebody and just, seek and discuss with a counselor just to make sure that we can get started on that path on the right step. And I'm not ashamed to say that because I think nobody should be ashamed to say that if anything happens to you, so many people in our country have lost a loved one due to COVID. And the trauma of this past year has just impacted, I wouldn't be surprised if it was millions of people. I think millions of people have been traumatized in the last year alone. And so if I want to be a good leader and set a good example, I have to show that I'm willing to do the steps that I think everybody should be willing to do if they've gone through trauma. And so I will keep you updated. Honestly, I will admit that I haven't done a ton of work on that front since Wednesday. I've just been resting and sleeping. And I have been doing work because I have to work, but I've been sure to not try to bury what happened in work, which, if I'm going to be completely honest, I was 18 years old when my father passed away, also a traumatizing event, and he was... I was with him. I saw it happen. And when I was 18 years old, I know that my response was to bury myself in work. And I was, we all have different responses. And my response was to be like very, I went back to school and I tried to raise my GPA and like I was doing all these clubs and all this other stuff. And it was really just, dealing with it by not dealing with it in a way. And I think as a consequence, it took me a long time to really process what happened and the loss of my dad at a young age. And I feel like it really took me maybe 10 years to really process what happened. Because I kept not processing it. And so, I think that's just because like you're okay, or just because you're able to go to school and do well and maintain a job and, what have you, it doesn't mean that thing hasn't hurt you. And you need to be able to process that hurt so that you can be your best self and that you can integrate what happened. And, I don't think any of this makes any person broken. I just think that, I don't think anyone makes it through life unscathed. Things are going to happen to all of us. And that is just, it's an essential fact of life. It is really sad. But, to live through this life is to often mean to lose loved ones or to live through trauma, or to, be exposed to things like that. And the best thing that we can do is to move through them and heal through them in a healthy way. Because if we can move through them in a healthy way, then that means we can end those cycles of trauma and prevent it from happening from someone else, right? Because trauma can often be very cyclical. Like they say, hurt people hurt people. And we can stop these cycles of hurt, right? Like when a white supremacist storms the front of the Capitol and engages in this highly violent event, that could lead even a person who was a victim of that violence to have their heart turn black and to, succumb to this cynicism, which may lead them to make a decision that hurts other people or spreads negativity. And then the cycle goes on and on and on. And a big part of our responsibility is in healing. A great thing about healing trauma is that you can stop those cycles. And you can stop those cycles of harm. You can stop those cycles of hurt. And so, sometimes that trauma can be, to some person may seem like, it's mild. And I don't want to put things on some hierarchy of like, oh, someone went through something way worse or what have you. Sometimes you have a very neglectful or verbally abusive parent. That is traumatizing. And so when we heal through that, whether it's that or whether it's something as traumatizing as, living through Wednesday's attack, I think that is... That's a big part of how we can make the world better. And that's how we can heal the world. And sometimes your trauma, isn't just about hurting other people, but sometimes you hurt yourself. Like you think that you are less than what you are, or you don't think you're worthy, or you've internalized it in a way, and it hurts the world because it prevents the world from really experiencing your brilliance and your greatness. And so anyways, all of this is to say, I hope you are okay. I feel okay so far, but we also know that these things have a long tail. And so I just wish each and every one of you really well, and I will continue to be providing you updates as time goes on. All right. Bye.